She was just sitting there, enjoying a quiet afternoon, when a stranger's glare cut through her like a knife. One demand, sharp and impossible: leave. No reason, no warning, just her skin, her presence, deemed unacceptable. Her heart raced as whispers of judgment filled the room. But nothing could prepare her for what came next. Because the world she knew, the people she trusted, were about to collide with a power she never expected. And when her father arrived, the CEO, everything changed. Would this moment destroy her or expose a truth they never saw coming? She woke up to the soft hum of the city outside her window, sunlight spilling across her neatly arranged room. Life had always been a careful balance: school, friends, family, and her dreams. At 16, she was bright, polite, and eager to make her mark, never imagining that her world could be interrupted by a glance, a whisper, or a demand. Her mornings were filled with laughter over breakfast, evenings spent with books and music, a life ordinary in its rhythm, but extraordinary in its quiet ambition. That day, like any other, she left her house wearing her favorite jacket, stepping onto the familiar streets she had walked countless times. People passed, nodding. Cars hummed. Passed, and the air carried the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby shop. Everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary. Yet beneath the routine there was a tension she hadn't noticed before, a subtle awareness that not everyone saw her the same way, that sometimes her very presence invited judgment she couldn't predict. It was invisible at first, a small shift in a glance, a lingering pause in conversation. And she, with her heart full of trust and hope, didn't suspect how fast that invisible tension could erupt into something unmistakable, something life-changing. Because, in just a few hours, the world she had taken for granted would collide with the harsh realities she had only heard about in stories. And the person who would intervene wasn't just anyone. It was her father, a man whose power and influence stretched far beyond what she could comprehend. But even that wouldn't prepare her for what was coming. The cafe was small, cozy, a place she had loved for months. Its warm lighting, the hum of quiet conversation, and the scent of coffee beans roasting in the back made it feel safe, a little sanctuary tucked into the bustling city. She slipped in through the door, her backpack light, her mind buzzing with the excitement of a weekend finally free from assignments and chores. She had chosen a corner seat, the one with the sunlight streaming through the window, where she could watch the street outside and lose herself in a book. The cafe was familiar, friendly, welcoming. At least it had always been. It started subtly. At first, she noticed the woman at the next table watching her a little too closely. There was nothing overt. No words. Just eyes that lingered longer than they should. She tried to ignore it, flipping the page of her book, telling herself she was imagining things. But the feeling didn't fade. It grew heavier, a tightening in her chest she couldn't shake. Then came the voice. Cold, sharp, cutting through. The soft background noise of the cafe. "Excuse me?" the woman said, standing suddenly, her posture rigid, her tone demanding. "You need to leave." She looked up, startled, scanning the room for some misunderstanding. Surely the barista had said something, but the barista was behind the counter, looking confused and hesitant. No one had said a word. "You heard me," the woman repeated, stepping closer. "This isn't appropriate." Her heart pounded. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask what she had done wrong, but the words lodged in her throat. Around her, the cafe had gone quiet. The gentle hum of conversation was replaced by the tense awareness of everyone in the room. Eyes flicked toward her, whispers spreading like wildfire. She felt the weight of the woman's stare, the unspoken accusation. "You don't belong here." Fear rose first, then anger, then disbelief. How could this be happening? She had come here, countless times, had always been polite, had always paid for her coffee and left no trace but a smile and a tip. Yet here she was, being told she had no right to exist in this space. Her hands trembled as she gathered her belongings. She tried to explain, to reason, but the woman's face hardened, unyielding. "I said leave, now!" It wasn't just the words. It was the way the woman spoke them, as if she had the authority of the entire world behind her. It was the certainty that she could demand compliance simply because she believed she could. And in that moment, the young girl realized something painful. This wasn't about manners or rules or even the cafe. It was about her skin, her presence, her very existence. She stepped toward the door, fighting the panic rising in her chest. But just as she reached for the handle, the woman blocked her path, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "I mean it," she said, louder this time. "Leave before I call someone." Time slowed. The room seemed to close in around her. The murmurs of the other patrons grew louder, judgmental. Some stared, some whispered, some turned away. She was suddenly aware of the invisible weight of history pressing down on her. The countless times people like her had been told to leave, to step back, to disappear. Her mind raced. Should she argue? Should she call for help? Should she just leave and avoid confrontation? Every instinct screamed in a different direction, each choice carrying risk. And then, through the tension, came a sound that made her stop. Click, click, click. A set of footsteps approaching, firm, deliberate. She looked up, and her heart skipped. Her father, the CEO. The man whose presence could command a boardroom, whose influence reached into the highest offices, whose reputation made people reconsider before crossing him. He had arrived, as if summoned by the very injustice that threatened his daughter. The woman froze, sensing the shift in the air. There was a power here she hadn't anticipated, a force beyond her control. Yet even in his presence, the woman didn't apologize, didn't step back. Instead, her gaze hardened, a dangerous edge sharpening in her voice. "You can't just, she stammered, flustered but defiant. Her father stepped forward, calm but unyielding. The tension between the two adults was electric. A collision of worlds, one built on entitlement and prejudice, the other on authority and unshakable love. The patrons watched, holding their breath. The whispers had turned to silence, the hum of the cafe fading into the background as the confrontation escalated. The woman's voice trembled, anger rising. "You can't just—" She tried again, but the words faltered. Her composure, once unshakable, began to crack under the weight of scrutiny and authority. The young girl watched, heart pounding, as her father's presence alone seemed to shift the balance of power. But she knew this wasn't the end. She knew that no matter how strong her father was, no one could undo the sting of humiliation, the abrupt reminder of how the world often judged her before seeing her. Then came a subtle, almost imperceptible, move from the woman. A glance toward the door, a hesitation, a moment that signaled she might escalate things further. The young girl's stomach tightened. The conflict wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. As her father spoke, his voice steady but commanding, the woman's defiance met a wall of consequence she hadn't expected. Every word, every gesture exposed the fragility beneath her bravado. And yet, even as, the young girl felt relief. A part of her knew that this was bigger than one cafe, one woman's prejudice. This was a glimpse of a broader reality, one where her presence, her identity, could ignite confrontation at any moment. The tension hung like a storm cloud. The young girl's mind raced, imagining the worst. Would the woman retreat? Would she call someone, escalate things outside? Would the small act of injustice turn into something larger, something that couldn't be contained? And then the phone rang. A sudden sharp vibration in the tense silence. The woman's face paled as she glanced at it. Her carefully maintained composure faltered, revealing a crack in her armor. The young girl's heart jumped. What was about to happen? Every second stretched, heavy with anticipation. The cafe, once a sanctuary, felt like the edge of a cliff, teetering between disaster and vindication. Eyes fixed on the two adults, on the invisible battle of authority and prejudice, on the collision of power and privilege. She realized, in that suspended moment, that this day, the confrontation, the humiliation, the unexpected arrival of her father, would be remembered. It would linger in her mind, shaping her understanding of the world, of fairness, of justice. And for everyone watching, for every stranger who bore witness, it was a lesson in how swiftly ordinary life could be disrupted, how fragile safety could be when prejudice went unchecked. The woman's next move would determine everything. Would she escalate further, dig in, fight back against the authority she resented? Or would she finally relent, exposed and shamed in a way she hadn't expected? The young girl's breath caught. The room seemed to hold its collective pulse. Every eye on her father, on the woman, waited. The answer could come in a heartbeat or explode into chaos. And then, in the tension that felt eternal, a shift. A single gesture, small but telling, signaling the first crack in the confrontation. But would it be enough to end the nightmare, or had it only begun? The air in the cafe felt electric, almost suffocating, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in her chest. Her father's presence had shifted the balance, but the woman's eyes burned with defiance, an almost dangerous stubbornness. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a collision of worlds, one fueled by fear, prejudice, and the raw human need to assert control. The woman stepped closer, her voice rising despite the tension. "You think just because he's who he is, you can dictate what happens here?" Each word was laced with contempt, a sharp weapon aimed directly at her. The young girl's stomach twisted. She felt the weight of every past insult, every time society had whispered that she didn't belong. It all crashed down in that instant, as if the world had decided to make her presence a battleground. Her father remained calm, but the calm was steel under pressure. Every gesture, every word he spoke, carried authority. Yet even his confidence couldn't erase the sting of humiliation, the knowledge that a stranger had dared to reduce his daughter to a target. "You will step aside," he said, voice low, but unyielding, carrying the weight of experience and power. The woman's lips tightened. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Step aside? For her? You don't get it. You can't just decide this is right." Her eyes darted around the cafe, searching for allies, for witnesses, for validation. She found none, only the tense silence, the weight of everyone watching, and the undeniable authority of the man standing before her. The young girl's chest felt tight, her hands clenched around the strap of her bag. She could feel the injustice pressing in, on all sides. It was more than words. It was a reminder of how easily the world could try to erase her existence, how quickly normal spaces could turn hostile. She had never felt so powerless, yet she had never felt so seen either, because her father's presence was a shield, a statement that she mattered. And then the woman made her move. A phone was pulled out, her fingers trembling but resolute. "I'm calling someone," she said, voice sharp. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Panic surged in the young girl's chest. Every scenario raced through her mind, the escalation, the humiliation, the potential for public shaming. The cafe, once a sanctuary, felt like a trap, walls closing in with every tick of the clock. Her father didn't flinch. He reached out, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. "Do what you must," he said, voice calm, controlled, yet every syllable carried a warning. "But understand this. Injustice cannot hide behind a phone call, and your actions today will be remembered." The woman's hands shook as she dialed, and the young girl could hear the soft clicks, each one a hammer striking at her nerves. Whispers around the room began again, murmurs of curiosity, judgment, some supportive glances, some hostile stares. It was a microcosm of society itself, divided and tense, caught in the suspense of a moral test that had nothing to do with her, actions and everything to do with her identity. Then the sound of the line connecting, the first tone, cut sharply through the air. The woman's voice wavered as she spoke, insisting on her version of events, her accusations spilling out faster than she could control. But her words rang hollow against the quiet, unwavering authority of the young girl and her father. In that moment, the imbalance of power was undeniable, yet the sting of prejudice lingered, raw and personal. Time seemed suspended. Every second stretched into eternity, and every eye in the cafe was on them. The young girl felt a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief swirling inside her, a storm she couldn't quiet. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to assert her own voice. But the weight of the situation pressed down, reminding her of the fragility of her position. She was caught between the injustice of prejudice and the hope offered by her father's presence. Then, unexpectedly, the woman's hand trembled, the phone slipping slightly as she realized she had no real power here. The authority she thought she wielded, the ability to intimidate, to dictate, to erase another human being, crumbled in the face of unwavering truth and influence. The young girl's heart surged. Relief, tentative but electrifying, coursed through her. But it wasn't over. The woman's pride was a living thing, resistant, refusing to yield completely. She straightened, attempting to salvage some shred of dignity, to reclaim the narrative she had tried to write over the young girl's presence. Her words became sharper, more desperate, a last stand of arrogance and fear masquerading as courage. Her father's eyes narrowed, every muscle in his body radiating controlled intensity. He spoke again, his voice a measured tide, carrying lessons learned from decades of confrontation and survival. "This ends now," he said, "not because of fear, not because of intimidation, but because justice, truth, and decency demand it." His words landed like a gavel, a sound that reverberated through the room, leaving no space for denial. For a fleeting moment, silence reigned. The woman's eyes flickered, a spark of doubt, perhaps even fear, breaking through the rigid wall of entitlement. Around them, the cafe's patrons exhaled collectively, tension easing in waves but curiosity still sharp, waiting to see how this climax would resolve. And then it happened. A final, subtle shift. The woman's shoulders slumped, her defiance, cracking under the weight of reality and witness. The phone call ended abruptly, the device now a tool of her own undoing rather than power. The young girl felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by a deep understanding of the world's fragility, of how quickly ordinary spaces could become arenas of injustice. Every breath she took seemed louder now, each heartbeat a reminder that she had survived this confrontation, but the experience had changed her. She had faced the full force of discrimination, the raw edge of prejudice, and emerged with her dignity intact, but not unscathed. The emotional toll weighed heavily, a mixture of relief, anger, and a newfound clarity about the world around. Her father's hand remained steady on her shoulder, a quiet reassurance that she was not alone, that her value was unshakable. Yet he, too, recognized the broader implications, how easily injustice could arise in even the most ordinary settings, how fragile civility could be when confronted with ignorance and fear. And in that moment, the young girl realized something profound. This was more than a personal victory. It was a statement, a lesson in resilience, in power, in the way truth and authority could collide with prejudice. But it was also a reminder that not every confrontation would end in vindication. that the world's harshness was real, and that courage and support were the shields that could make a difference. As the woman finally stepped aside, muttering under her breath, the young girl took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew the tension had not vanished entirely. The echoes of prejudice would linger, but the immediate storm had passed. She had faced the confrontation head-on, with the presence of someone who refused to let injustice dominate. Yet, even in relief, a question gnawed at her. How many others would face similar hostility without the shield of someone so powerful? How many moments of prejudice would go unchecked, leaving scars that weren't as visible as the tension she had endured? The answer was uncertain, terrifying, and painfully real. And as the young girl stepped forward, moving through the cafe, with a cautious sense of victory, the room seemed to exhale with her. But even in that exhale, there was the lingering weight of truth, a truth that demanded reflection, action, and awareness. Because this confrontation, intense and personal, was also a mirror showing the world as it was, with prejudice, lurking in ordinary places, with assumptions and biases ready to strike at anyone deemed other. And while she had survived, the story was far from over. It had only reached its most visible point, the climax, but the impact, the lesson, and the ripple of awareness were only beginning to unfold. And then, in the final beat of tension before resolution, she looked at the woman, at the world around her, and felt a quiet, unwavering resolve forming in her chest. She would not be invisible, she would not be silenced, and she would never forget this moment. The power of injustice had been met with the power of truth, and that truth would carry forward, beyond this cafe, beyond this confrontation, into the world outside. The cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of conversation resuming, cups clinking, and soft music filling the spaces between words. To anyone looking from the outside, it was just another ordinary afternoon. But for her, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Every sight, every sound carried the weight of what had just unfolded. The confrontation, the judgment, the injustice, and the courage it had taken to survive it. She sat back in her chair, heart still pounding, as if it refused to slow after the storm that had passed. Relief and exhaustion intertwined, leaving her drained yet oddly aware of her own resilience. The fear that had gripped her chest earlier had not entirely disappeared, and perhaps it never would, but it had been met with action, with protection, and with a profound reminder that she was not powerless. Her father stayed close, a quiet presence beside her. He didn't need to speak. The intensity of his gaze, the firmness of his hand on her shoulder spoke volumes. It was a reassurance that she had been seen, that her dignity had not been erased, and that love and authority could stand against prejudice, even in its most ordinary and terrifying forms. As the minutes ticked by, she realized how deeply this moment had etched itself into her consciousness. It wasn't just the humiliation she had endured or the fear she had felt. It was the stark, undeniable truth of how quickly a sense of safety could be stripped away simply because of the color of her skin. And while this incident had a fortunate outcome, she knew it could have gone differently in another time, another place, or for another person. Outside the cafe, the city carried on, oblivious to the storm that had passed within those walls. But within her, the world had shifted. She understood now, with a clarity that was both empowering and painful, how prejudice could appear anywhere, under any circumstances, often hidden behind smiles, polite greetings, or assumptions of neutrality. This confrontation was not an isolated event. It was a reflection of countless moments that went unseen, unheard, and unchallenged every single day. In the days that followed, the memory lingered, stubborn and vivid. She replayed the scene over and over. The woman's glare, the sharp demand, the whispers of the patrons, her father's calm authority, and the moment the woman finally stepped aside. Each replay brought with it a mixture of emotions: anger at the injustice, relief at the resolution, and a profound recognition of her own strength. But more than that, she felt a responsibility to remember, to speak, to ensure that this story and the lessons it carried didn't fade into silence. She understood now that her experience, while personal, was part of a larger narrative. It was a single thread in a vast tapestry of racial prejudice, subtle and overt, experienced by millions. Each act of injustice, no matter how small it might seem to the world, carried real consequences, shaping lives in ways both visible and hidden. She began to notice the world differently. Faces in a crowd, glances in passing, interactions that once seemed inconsequential. All of them now carried a weight she could not ignore. She recognized patterns she had never fully acknowledged, biases that slipped into ordinary life unnoticed, and the quiet resilience required to navigate them. She understood that the courage displayed in the cafe, the courage of her father, yes, but also her own, was not just about confronting a single act of prejudice. It was about acknowledging the systemic nature of injustice and refusing to be silenced by it. Friends and family noticed the change too. She spoke more openly about what had happened, about the fear, the confrontation, and the lessons learned. Her voice carried an authority that belied her age, a conviction born from direct experience. And as she shared, she realized something important. By telling her story, by refusing to let it be swallowed by shame or invisibility, she was contributing to a broader awareness, planting seeds of understanding in those willing to listen. Yet even as she reflected, she recognized the fragility of this progress. One cafe, one confrontation, one father stepping in. These were not guarantees for everyone. Countless others faced similar situations alone, without protection, without support, without validation. The injustice she had survived was a stark reminder that courage and resilience were often required just to exist in spaces that should have been neutral or welcoming. And while her story ended with a measure of triumph, the underlying problem, the deep, persistent prejudice, remained. She began to consider her own role in this ongoing struggle. Could she speak up when she witnessed injustice? Could she support others who faced similar humiliation, fear, or discrimination? Could she help illuminate the ways in which ordinary spaces, ordinary interactions, and ordinary people perpetuated systemic biases, sometimes unknowingly? The questions weighed on her, heavy but necessary, driving her to think not just about survival, but about impact, about action, about the possibility of change. The cafe, once again filled with chatter and laughter, had become a symbol rather than just a location. It was a reminder that racism often appeared in small, subtle ways, not just in dramatic confrontations or headlines. And the resolution of that day, her father's intervention, the woman's retreat, was not the end of the story. It was a lesson in awareness, in vigilance, and in the power of standing firm against injustice, no matter how ordinary the setting. She realized, too, that the emotional weight of the experience had given her a perspective that others might never understand. The fear, the humiliation, the tension, it all became a lens through which she could view the world, sharpening her empathy and strengthening her resolve. She saw now that each instance of prejudice was interconnected, part of a larger structure, of discrimination that touched countless lives, shaping opportunities, self-perception, and the way people navigated society. And yet, amidst the weight of these reflections, there was hope. The incident had also shown her that courage, love, and authority could disrupt cycles of injustice. Her father's presence had been decisive, but so too had been her own resilience, her refusal to be invisible, her willingness to endure discomfort rather than surrender. These truths, while difficult to embrace fully, offered a blueprint for confronting prejudice: recognition, confrontation, and unwavering assertion of one's humanity. In the quiet moments that followed, she made a promise to herself. She would carry this experience forward, not as a source of fear, but as a catalyst for action. She would remember the sting of prejudice, the fragility of ordinary spaces, and the power of standing with those who face injustice. And she would share her story, not only to validate her own experience, but to encourage others to reflect, to act, and to challenge the subtle and overt biases that persist in society. The impact extended beyond the personal. Every story like hers, every act of confrontation or support, contributed to a broader dialogue about race, equity, and justice. She understood now that silence allowed prejudice to thrive, and that visibility, her own and that of allies, was a powerful tool. She realized that courage was contagious, that speaking up could ripple outward, influencing behavior, perceptions, and even policy in ways that were impossible to measure in the moment. And as she left the cafe that day, stepping back into the rhythm of the city, she carried more than relief. She carried understanding, a sharpened awareness of the world's imperfections, and the knowledge that every interaction, every decision, every act of courage or apathy mattered. She knew that her story was one of millions, each unique but bound by the shared experience of prejudice, resilience, and the ongoing struggle for dignity. The lesson was clear and the message unambiguous. Injustice thrives in silence, but courage, awareness, and advocacy can illuminate the shadows. She had faced fear and humiliation, and yet she had emerged with clarity, purpose, and a renewed sense of agency. The world was far from perfect, but she understood now that change, both personal and systemic, required witnessing, acting, and refusing to accept inequality as inevitable. And in the stillness of that evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, she asked herself, and the world, a question that would linger long after the moment had passed. How many more silent injustices go unnoticed every day? How many more moments like this, unchallenged, shape lives and identities? And if we do not confront them, who will? Her story was not just about one cafe, one woman, or even one father stepping in. It was a testament to the endurance of those who face prejudice, a call to action for those who witness it, and a reminder that every voice, every act of courage, every refusal to be invisible can ripple into something far greater than a single moment. Because the truth was simple yet profound. Injustice anywhere may feel personal, but standing against it is a responsibility that belongs to all of us. And in that responsibility lies the power to transform ordinary spaces into arenas of dignity, respect, and humanity.